Well, are we about to see an end to the war in Ukraine, or does Putin smell a trap? Is President Trump overplaying his hand? Overnight, some big developments, and developments up just a few minutes ago, from both the Ukrainian side, the Russian side, and the U.S. side. Ukraine has agreed to an immediate 30-day U.S. proposed ceasefire that opens the door for peace. Secretary of State Marco Rubio last night in Saudi Arabia saying that Ukraine is ready to start talking and stop shooting. And he said, they negotiated for about 7 hours. Hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians, he said, and we hope that they'll say yes and then say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court, says Marco Rubio. As part of the deal, the U.S. will lift its pause on Ukrainian intelligence sharing and will immediately resume lethal aid shipments, which makes zero sense to me. So we're going to have a ceasefire agreement. Here's some more weapons. Here's some more intelligence sharing so that you can launch HIMARS attacks on. It makes no sense. I can't figure that part out for the life of me, but maybe someone smarter than me can figure that out. Russia has responded. The Kremlin does not appear committed to this ceasefire. Putin spokesperson Peskov told reporters this morning that Moscow needs to have a briefing from the U.S. before anything happens. And according to reports this morning in Reuters, another source says Putin's government views this deal as a trap. Smells a rat here. And new developments just a short time ago that Ukraine will not recognize any territory occupied by Russia. So what the hell is happening here? It sounds like it's all falling apart, or maybe, there's 3D chess being played here that I don't know, or 5-dimensional chess. Where's Spock on the bridge of the Enterprise? Because I don't know. Let's ask someone who does know this. It's Colonel Douglas Macgregor, the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. Combat veteran, served under President Trump. He's always a voice of reason in a sea of craziness. So, Colonel, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here. By the way, you don't need to take that Star Trek metaphor too far. Your set begins to look more and more Star Trek-like.
Colonel, where do things stand right now?
That's a good question, and there's not an easy answer. The problem is I'm beginning to think this is turning into a dialogue of the deaf. The Russians have made it clear repeatedly over the last couple of years that they're not going to accept any ceasefire prior to negotiations. They've made it clear they're happy to negotiate, but they're going to continue to fight and move while the negotiation continues. And the problem that the Russians have is that they assume, especially since we resumed these military aid and equipment deliveries, along with presumably more cash, that there will be no end to the Ukrainian fighting. In other words, why sign up for a ceasefire and then watch your opponent rebuild his shattered force just in time to resume the fight after the 30-day ceasefire? So I think the Russians have conditions. They've said they want to denazify Ukraine. They want to get rid of all these people that are associated with the radical Nazi formations that have been committing atrocities and murdering people unnecessarily. They also want to demilitarize Ukraine before they accept any sort of final solution that involves neutrality. So I think the Russian side wants one set of things. We seem to be anxious to have a ceasefire so that everyone can run out of the White House and say, see, we just scored a big win. We have a ceasefire. We're bringing peace. I don't think the Russians are interested in a win that way. They want to see an end to the fighting just as much President Trump does, but they're not going to sign on for a ceasefire without the other conditions being fulfilled.
So where does Ukraine sit in all of this? Do they have a seat at the table?
It's a good question. I think from the Russian standpoint, they wonder why President Trump doesn't simply rid himself of this troublesome man, Zelensky. Remember, from the Russian standpoint, none of this would have happened without us. We're the ones that installed this anti-Russian government in 2014. We're the ones that have backed and sponsored Zelensky. We're the ones that built up, equipped, and trained the Ukrainian force, along with some of our NATO allies, with the explicit purpose of attacking Russia. So their view is, look, why don't you stop aiding these people, number one, and then pull all of your people out of Ukraine? I think if we did that, we would be taken far more seriously. Right now, just to agree to a ceasefire when there's been no acceptance of any of the conditions, that the Russians have stipulated, I think is simply impossible. So at this rate, I think we're getting nowhere quickly. The war will continue, and the Russians will slowly, deliberately advance to the Dnieper River and potentially cross it. They may take Odessa in the near future. And in the meantime, nothing changes fundamentally.
I want to play some video now for you. This is from friend of the show, Patrick Lancaster, who just posted this about, looks like an American HIMARS attack, using American HIMARS once again on Russian targets. Just as we're talking about a ceasefire, watch this. Yeah, so here you can see this destruction hitting civilian targets once again, and like this is how you come to the peace table, Colonel.
Well, specifically, the Ukrainians have targeted civilian locations from the outset. And so from their standpoint, they just want to kill Russians, maim Russians, harm Russians. That's their goal. They can't do it on the battlefield because the Russian military overpowers whatever they do. So what do? They try to launch long-range strike weapons, whether these are drones or, as you pointed out, rocket artillery, in the hopes of doing damage. But this is kind of a waste of time, to be blunt, because while you may hurt some Russians, this stiffens opposition to any sort of agreement whatsoever. So you may end up putting the Russians in a position where they conclude the only way to end this war is to cross the Dnieper River and root out the whole problem, which means eliminate this Ukrainian government 100%.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the bargaining position here and what President Trump is thinking. And I don't know that I can. You know President Trump better than just about anyone. You've served under him. Do you think that the Trump administration is making the right bargain here, the right moves?
Not really, no. I think President Trump is very sincere when he says he wants peace in Ukraine. That's good. That's the first critical step. The next step ought to be suspend all aid, which he did earlier. That was the right thing to do. Stop aiding this radical Nazi government in Kiev that's done so much damage. Get rid of this man, Zelensky. He's not a legitimate president. He suspended all elections. He suspended what we would normally consider basic human rights inside the country. He's tried to erase the Orthodox Christian Church. So I think all of those things that President Trump did initially were right. The problem, though, is that people have gotten around him and say, well, wait a minute, boss. We have to come out of this like it's a win. We have to show you in the winning position. You have to be the dominant partner. Well, at this point, being the dominant partner is very useful if you want to put an end to the war, and you do that by stopping the aid and pulling all the Americans that are there, military, non-military, civilian, intelligence, whatever they are, out of the country. That makes it very clear that we're finished supporting this country anymore. But instead of doing that, he's now saying, well, if they won't accept the ceasefire that we've offered on the assumption that this is a ceasefire they must accept, they don't have to. They've won the war. The war is in their hands. They have the strategic initiative. Unless we're willing to declare war, march our forces into Western Ukraine and commit the United States Armed Forces to a direct confrontation with Russia, we don't have much to say. So the best thing we can do is what was described before. But I think they're telling President Trump, you have to do these things and make it look like the Russians have backed down, that they've lost, and that we're winning. That's a lot of nonsense. The only people we're kidding are the people that are sitting in the United States in the Oval Office or potentially on the Hill. In fact, I don't even think most Americans would conclude such a thing. It's a travesty. But I think that's kind of where we may be at this point.
And we're seeing so much propaganda right now. We're seeing Ukrainian flags popping up all over the place once again. You're seeing people putting the Ukrainian flag back in their social media profiles. There seems to be a massive amount of money and marketing effort to try to keep this war going as much as they can. You're seeing the mainstream media, which is fully in the tank for this. Of course, they want to continue. NATO wants this to continue. You saw the big kiss fest, the hug fest with Ursula von der Leyen and Zelensky the other day, in Brussels. So they really want this to continue to go. How many more people do you think will die? I saw last night, you mentioned the numbers on Tucker's show last night, over roughly 1.2 million Ukrainians dead, not not casualties, killed in action. How many more people do you think are going to die for this boondoggle?
Potentially another 50 to 100,000. That would not be out of line with past experience. When you are at the end of a conflict and your opponent has lost, the opponent begins to retreat. This is what the Wehrmacht did during the last 2 years of the war. They began these long retreats. As you retreat, you are an easy target. And the further you retreat, the more equipment you lose, the more men you lose, the easier you are to attack. That's where Ukraine is right now. They have very little left to fight. They have a very small population compared with what they had at the beginning. The population doesn't want to fight. People don't want to continue this. They want an end to the killing. And so you're dragooning people into the force any way you can get them, and they're essentially cannon fodder. You put them out in front, they die, you move on and put more cannon fodder out there. This is unacceptable, but the Russians will move forward, offer these people an opportunity to surrender. If they surrender, they're being treated well. They haven't been harmed or mishandled. But if they don't, they'll just kill them and continue marching west. And eventually they'll all be on the river. And then the key decision will be, do we march into Kiev fundamentally, finally, and end this? Do we march into Odessa, liberate Odessa, which was historically always Russian, never Ukrainian? That's where the Russians will be. And in that process, another 50 to 100,000 Ukrainian dead is certainly possible.
Just unbelievable. Well, where do you think the next 48 hours? I mean, to me, this is like a critical period, Colonel. I'll get you out of here on this. Where do you think things sit in the next 48 hours, these negotiations? It seems like we could go one of two ways. Move dramatically towards peace or quickly in the opposite direction.
My gut feeling tells me, and I may be wrong, but I think this is true, that if President Trump sat across the table from President Putin with translators and a couple of assistants to help with maps and so forth, that they could hammer out a solution within a day. I really believe that. Unfortunately, the people that surround President Trump have been very pro-Ukrainian, determined to destroy Russia, to harm Russia. They've advocated it. I don't think they're going to represent President Trump's fundamental interest, which is to end the war. And I think that's what's happened. They've looked for reasons to keep it going, and they found it. Push the ceasefire, which they know the Russians will not accept.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, always a voice of reason in the sea of craziness right now. When the president is surrounded by a whole bunch of neocons, I hope that they're paying attention. I hope they let him see like an interview like you did on Tucker or this episode today, and that the president could sit down and actually do that instead of, I guess, talking about Teslas at the White House. Sit down and have a meeting with Putin. Colonel, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you too. Bye-bye.